cap the answer to that? Is the fact that Manchester didn't plan for Bedford leaving, would the tax cap have aided and abetted Manchester's ability to embrace what they obviously chose to ignore?
No, obviously not. I mean, it hasn't helped really in Nashua either. There are two issues here. There's the issue of spending, and there's the issue of how we collect the dollars that we spend. And that's a huge separate issue, and how we run our local governments in New Hampshire. And I think they're poorly run, and I think, frankly, an overhaul is needed. But that is a completely separate issue from this idea of a tax cap, which to me fundamentally changes how we operate in New Hampshire. And I think it's a bad idea. If we as taxpayers choose to elect people that are going to raise our taxes, that is our right. We get to choose to spend more of each other's money. That's what democracy is called. And so if we want to elect, Ken there, who's going to spend less of our money, then that's our right. If we want to elect somebody else who spends more, like Tammy, then we can choose to do that. But that really is the key. And I know that tax cap always leads to talk of spending, but I like to separate the issues, because a tax cap is really an issue of process and how we deal with government. And I just feel that 1 year, one group should not be obligating the future, whether it's spending or whether it's not spending. Every year you look at what money you have to spend, you decide to spend it, you plan for the future, just like you do in a family. And essentially what a tax cap does is the people who are sitting at this table now essentially are deciding for people in the future what we're going to spend. And I just think that is undemocratic.
But unfortunately, history doesn't show that they ever plan for the future. You're saying, yes, we need to reform, that's right, we do need to reform, and this is a good way to start. By making government officials responsible for the future of that community, even though they were elected.
Why not just elect better people? I mean, why not work harder to get people who you think support your view to run for office?
Ken, you're mayor.
Yes.
How many votes, what percentage of the vote did you need to become mayor?
Well, I got 85%.
You got 85, but if you had to win, was it be 50% plus one? That would get you mayor.
Well, whoever has the plurality.
The plurality, but you would need a majority depending on what the number was. For the tax cap, if a community realizes that the tax cap now is harming education, that maybe it's harming infrastructure, and they don't like the tax cap, what does a community do if the tax cap is in place? Because what I'm trying to figure out is...
You can repeal by petition with a majority vote of the community.
So they could pass it by a majority, and they could repeal it by a majority?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And there are override provisions available to the City Council and Board of
Every single one of the petition
They have to.
Yep.
They have to have an override.
Majority.
Yeah,
So,
like many of the things that we do in New Hampshire.
People that you just said people should elect. So if they're concerned that they need to spend more money, then you're right. They should go out and they should elect at least 2/3 of that town's board who would be willing to go on record to say they will override the will of the people of that community.
You're giving the minority more power than the majority in this system, and that's my issue.
But we do that all the time in New Hampshire.
We only do it with
absolutely
issues that go along.
Bonding issues to enact SB2 is the same thing, to enact a constitutional amendment. We turn to supermajorities frequently for policy issues in New Hampshire.
Those are for things that affect long term. Those are usually for multi-year commitments. And the idea there, the fundamental reason for doing that is like, hey, we are obligating future people, so we're going to require a larger vote. But in this case here, we are talking about regular year-to-year spending, not special bond issues.
Well, and I think that you're making too much. I think that you're making too much of the supermajority issue, because if you're
2/3 is a lot.
2/3 is a lot. Is what's
in the city of Laconia
throughout all of our RSAs, which is why that number is what they choose.
In the city of Laconia, a simple majority of the city council is 2/3. Would you have a problem with that?
You mean
in Franklin?
5? Is it 5? So it's 3?
6.
Oh, it's 6. Okay.
6. So a simple majority that you need to pass a budget anyway is also 2/3.
We don't have that problem in Manchester.
Well, in Franklin, it's one more councillor. A single councillor makes the difference between simple majority and 2/3.
But the problem is that Laconia is the exception and not the rule, because what you're talking about is you're talking about a 2/3 vote, and 2/3 in places like Manchester where they have a number of aldermen. We are talking about rule by a very tiny minority. It's almost like tyranny of a tiny minority that can decide against the will of really the vast majority of folks.
So you have the same argument then against SB2, that the minority can prevent a majority from going with SB2.
I actually think that that's absolutely probably the case as well. I think at some point in time, what is this? This is live free or die New Hampshire. This wasn't, being dictated to by a tiny minority. But what's more remarkable here is how many times have communities been outraged at the cap and decided to actually repeal? You've told me about the experience since 1989.
I'm unaware of any.
So I'm just
in
curious.
fact, I mean, this is a very good point to make. In the history of the tax cap in Franklin, it has been before the voters on 4 occasions. Every time it gets more popular.
Yep.
It got 80% of the vote the last time it was before the voters.
You keep talking about the two.
I mean, Nashua's a very different case. I mean, in Nashua's case, the board there continually overrides it. And they in fact use.
So they can override. It's not really that difficult.
But
that just
again, it takes a supermajority. No, I'm not arguing
it's
one way or
obvious.
the other on that. I'm just saying that you're actually giving the minority a
Well, how
larger
about
say
we-
than the majority. But just hold on one second. But they've actually used bonding in a couple issues that should have just been regular old-fashioned spending or not spending, if you so choose, to get around the tax cap. And you do see that
So
happening.
distortion happens.
Well, of course, they end up putting money into
government.
long.
So they're able to bond with a simple majority? I don't think that's the case.
With the board, they can decide to bond stuff, I believe, with a simple majority. But they've decided to put, in other words, to keep things under the tax cap, which is sort of the political point to score points with the voters. They've shifted monies, and I covered Nashville for a number of years, shifted monies into the bonding. These should just be sort of general spending issues.
Kind of like when we raid the rainy day funds
Let
to balance the budget.
Let me
Correct,
ask.
absolutely
No, wait,
right.
let me ask about the tax cap because there are variations on a theme. In Franklin, is it for the entire property tax bill, or is it just
Yes.
for the municipal part of the property tax bill? Because I think that's the other thing that people need to understand is you can have a tax cap on just the education
depends-
component.
right.
You could have a tax cap on just the municipal component because part of the problem is that's like a balloon. You push it in one side, it can pop out the
Depends.
other.
It depends on that individual community's charter. If that in Concord, for example, their spending cap will only cover the municipal side. If I'm not mistaken, it won't cover the schools. So and it varies from time to time because every charter varies from time to time.
In Franklin, all the taxing entities are covered by it, as well as in Laconia and Dover.
All right, Ms. New Hampshire Advantage. If people are interested in doing a tax cap, how do they do this?
Well,
do they collect signatures? Do they go to the Secretary of
Right
State?
now,
do they call their alderman? What do they
it has
do?
to be a chartered community. We have to collect 20% of the signatures of the voters from the last municipal election. We're doing it in 8 towns: Manchester, Bedford, Concord, Merrimack, Londonderry, Somersworth, Portsmouth, and Rochester. That was very good.
That's good. That is
people
good.
People can visit our website at thenhadvantage.com and get all sorts of information there. And we're talking about letting people decide and whatnot. I think you're right. I think we should let people decide by signing this petition and getting it on the ballot. And in November, we'll see just how many voters in New
That was
Hampshire
the
want a
best
spending
commercial
cap.
I ever heard. Thank you so much, Tammy. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you,
Thank you
Ken.
for having me.
All right, we'll see you next week. This is Political Chowder. Have a great week. Ciao.